Have you ever done everything right and still been judged for it? Have you ever stayed silent, not out of pride, but out of peace, and then watched people turn that silence into a story about you that was never true? Have you ever tried to explain yourself and realized that no matter what you said, and it would not change what someone already believed about you? Have you ever felt so misunderstood that you started to wonder if maybe something was wrong with you? If maybe you were the problem all along? If you have felt any of that, if your heart just moved even a little at those questions, then this story is for you. Not because it has all the answers, but because someone else has walked through that exact kind of pain, and what they found on the other side will stay with you. Here is something that might sound strange at first. What if the misunderstanding was not a mistake? What if the confusion people had about you, the false assumptions, the silence that got mistaken for coldness, the kindness that got read as weakness? What if none of that happened by accident? What if God allowed it on purpose? Not to punish you, not because you failed, but because He was doing something in you that could only happen when the noise of human approval went quiet. Sometimes God allows misunderstanding to break your dependence on human approval. Sometimes being misjudged is not the end of your story. It is where God begins to strengthen your identity. And sometimes the pain of not being understood is the very place where God teaches you to stand in truth. That is the story we are going to walk through today. A story about a woman named Clara. A woman who gave everything she had, quietly, faithfully, without drawing attention to herself, and found that the very people she poured her life into were the ones who understood her the least. A woman who hit a moment where she had to choose between chasing people's approval or trusting God's purpose. And a woman who, on the other side of that choice, discovered something about herself and about God that no season of being praised could have ever taught her. Let us begin. Clara grew up in a small town in the southeastern part of the country, the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, where church was not just Sunday morning but Wednesday evening, and every potluck dinner, and every funeral, and every baptism in between. She grew up watching her mother fold napkins for the church kitchen, watching her father shake hands with the same people every week for 40 years, watching community built slowly and intentionally through small acts of faithfulness repeated over time. She loved it. She genuinely did. She was not the kind of person who performed belonging. She felt it. The smell of old hymnals, the sound of a choir that was not always in perfect tune, but always in earnest, the particular warmth of people who had known each other long enough to cry together without explaining themselves. Clara was quiet by nature, not shy exactly, but careful. She chose her words slowly. She listened more than she talked. She was the kind of person who would notice when someone at a gathering was standing alone, and she would walk over and stand with them, not because she had something clever to say, but because she had decided that no one should stand alone if she could help it. She grew up, went to college 2 states away, studied social work because she genuinely wanted to help people, came back home after graduation because home was where her heart had always been, took a job at a local non-profit that provided after-school care for kids from difficult situations, and threw herself into that work with everything she had. For several years, things were good. Not perfect. Her salary was not much. The work was heavy. But she felt purposed. She felt like she was in the right place. Then the season changed. It started slowly, the way most painful seasons do. Not with a single dramatic event, but with a small shift in the air, something barely noticeable at first, like the first week in October when the light changes and you cannot quite explain how, but you know something is different. Her supervisor at the non-profit, a woman named Janet, who had hired her and mentored her, retired. A new director came in. His name was Marcus. He was efficient, analytical, results-driven in a way that made Clara feel like she was always slightly behind, always slightly wrong, always slightly not enough. He restructured the team. He introduced new reporting systems. He held staff meetings that felt more like audits than conversations. Clara adapted. She was good at adapting, but something in the culture of the workplace changed in a way she could not quite name. Where there had been warmth, there was now performance. Where there had been collaboration, there was now competition. The other staff members seemed to navigate this shift more easily than she did, or at least they seemed to. They laughed at Marcus's jokes. They adjusted their language to match his. They got louder and sharper and more assertive in meetings. Clara stayed the same. That was probably where it started. That gap between who she was and what the new environment seemed to reward. She was not being difficult. She was not being resistant. She was just being Clara. But somehow, in the absence of explanation, in the silence between her and her co-workers, a story started forming. A story about her that she had no hand in writing. She heard it second-hand at first. That she was standoffish. That she thought she was better than the rest of the team. That she did not really care about the work. She just wanted the job security. That her quietness was actually passive aggression, dressed up as professionalism. She was stunned, not just hurt, stunned, because there was such a precise distance between those things people were saying and what she knew to be true in her own heart. She did not feel better than anyone. She felt deeply connected to the kids she served and uncertain about almost everything else. She was not passively aggressive. She was privately grieving the culture that had once made this work feel like a calling and now made it feel like a transaction. She tried to explain herself once. In a team meeting, she brought up her concerns about the direction of the program. She raised her hand, took a breath, and said calmly that she felt like the relational element of their work was being undervalued in the new metric system, that the kids they served needed consistency and emotional safety, not just quantified outcomes. She said it clearly. She said it kindly. She thought maybe it would open a conversation. Marcus nodded slowly, in the way people nod when they have already decided not to really hear you. Two of her co-workers exchanged a glance. Nothing changed. And afterwards, in the break room, she overheard one of them say, "Clara always has to make things complicated." She went home that evening and sat on her couch for a long time without turning on any lights. The sun went down. The room got dark. She just sat there. She was not angry. She wanted to be angry. Anger would have felt cleaner, more directional. Instead, she felt something quieter and harder to carry. She felt invisible. She felt like she was shouting in a room where no one could hear her, not because the room was too noisy, but because somehow the frequency of her voice had stopped reaching people. The hardest part was not work. The hardest part was what started happening at church. She had been attending the same church since she moved back home. It was her family's church. She had grown up in those pews. But churches are communities, and communities are made of people, and people carry their assumptions from one place into another without always knowing they are doing it. She was not sure exactly how it happened, but at some point a distance started forming between her and some of the women in her church friend group. Small at first, fewer texts, fewer invitations to lunches that she found out about afterward. A particular kind of warmth that seemed to cool without any clear cause. She kept showing up. She kept serving on the hospitality team, kept making meals for families who had new babies or recent funerals, kept showing up early to set up chairs. But something had shifted. She later learned, again second-hand, in that awful way that information travels in close communities, that someone had said something about her, that she was going through something spiritually, that she had been pulling away, that there was pride in her, a quiet pride, the kind that is hard to see but easy to feel. She had not been pulling away. She had been quietly devastated and trying not to show it because she did not want to be a burden. She had been showing up anyway, even when her heart felt like it was made of wet sand, because she believed that faithfulness was not just for the seasons when it felt good, but what looked like faithfulness from the inside had apparently looked like coldness from the outside. There was a Sunday morning she will never forget. She arrived early, as always, to set up for the hospitality team. She was arranging coffee cups when two women from her group came in, talking and laughing, and then went quiet when they saw her. They smiled. The kind of smile that is more door than welcome. She smiled back. They moved to the other side of the room. She finished setting up. She sat through the service. She sang the hymns. She gave her offering. She shook hands at the end. She got in her car, drove to an empty park nearby, and sat there for 45 minutes before she could drive home. That was the morning she talked to God differently than she ever had before. She did not pray politely. She did not use church language. She sat in her car with her hands in her lap, and she spoke out loud, in the plain, honest voice of someone who has stopped pretending. She said, "God, I do not understand what is happening. I have not done anything wrong that I know of. I have tried to be kind. I have tried to serve. I have tried to stay faithful, and I feel more alone than I have ever felt in my life. I feel like I am living in a version of my own story that I did not write and cannot correct. People think they know me, and what they think is so far from what I actually am that I do not even know how to close the gap anymore." She paused. Then she said, "I am tired of trying to be understood." That was it. That was the thing she had been carrying without knowing its name, not the misunderstanding itself, the exhaustion of trying to fix it, the constant low-level effort of monitoring how she was being perceived and trying to adjust herself to close the distance between what people thought and what was true. She was worn out from the managing of it. And in that silence, in that parked car beside that empty park on a Sunday morning, something shifted. She does not describe it as a voice. Not exactly. More like a thought that arrived with unusual weight, the kind of thought that you know did not originate in your own processing. And it was this: I know you. I know your heart. I know every intention that never got seen. I know every act of love that was misread. I know every silent moment that got mistaken for distance. I know you, fully, truly, down to the parts you have never shown anyone. And I am not confused about you. She started crying. Not the desperate kind of crying, the relieved kind. The kind that comes when you have been holding something so tightly for so long that when you finally let it go, your whole body shakes. She sat in that car and let herself be known. That was not the end of the hard season. Life does not usually work that way. The difficulties at work did not immediately resolve. The coolness at church did not immediately thaw. She still went home some evenings to an apartment that felt more quiet than peaceful. She still had moments of wondering if she should try harder to explain herself, to defend herself, to make people see. But something had changed in the root of her, something beneath the circumstances. A kind of steadiness that was not the same as happiness, but was perhaps more durable. She started spending time in the Psalms, not because anyone told her to, just because she found that the people in those ancient poems were also crying out to God in honest, unpolished voices. They were also saying, "I do not understand." They were also asking why the people around them had turned. They were also discovering that the ground beneath them was God, and not the approval of the people who had once praised them. She found company there. Real company. The kind that does not require you to explain yourself. She kept going to work. She kept doing her job with the same care she always had, maybe more so, because she had quietly made a decision that her faithfulness was no longer for the sake of being seen as faithful. It was just who she was. It was between her and God and the children sitting in those after-school rooms who needed a steady presence more than they needed anything else she could give. There was a boy named Deshawn, 11 years old, who had been in the program for 2 years. He was smart and stubborn and deeply untrusting of adults. He had been through more disruption before the age of 10 than most people see in a lifetime. He rarely spoke in group activities. He sat at the edges of things. He watched. He and Clara had a slow, careful friendship built out of many small moments. She never pushed. She never asked too many questions. She just showed up, consistently, and let him decide how close to come. One afternoon, several months into Clara's hard season, Deshawn came and sat beside her while she was organizing art supplies in the back room. He picked up a marker, clicked it open and closed a few times, and then said without looking at her, "Miss Clara, how come you always come back?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, still looking at the marker. "Like, even when stuff is hard, you still come. Other people, when stuff gets hard, they stop coming." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Because you are here, and you deserve someone who keeps showing up even when things are hard." He nodded slowly. Then he put the marker down, went back to the main room, and joined the group activity. Just like that. She sat in the back room for a moment after he left. She had just said that to him. But she had also, in a way she did not entirely plan, said it to herself. Because you are here, and you deserve someone who keeps showing up even when things are hard. That is what faithfulness looks like. Not triumphant, not celebrated, just quiet, just returning, just being present even when the presence is not applauded. A few weeks later, something happened that she had not expected. Marcus called her into his office. She prepared herself for more friction, more of the low-grade professional tension that had defined the past year. Instead, he looked tired. He looked like a man who had been carrying something he was not sure how to put down. He told her that a funding organization had come to observe the program for a possible major grant. They had come unannounced, or at least they had given very little notice, and they had spent an afternoon watching the staff interact with the kids. They had specifically noted in their preliminary report the quality of relational consistency they observed, and they had specifically asked about Clara. Marcus slid the report across his desk. She read the line that referenced her work. Among the staff observed, one program coordinator demonstrated an exceptional capacity for presence and relational stability with participants, particularly those who have experienced disruption. This quality, which is difficult to quantify but easy to recognize, is the kind of consistent human investment that defines effective youth development work. She read it twice. Marcus said, "I owe you an apology. I came in here with a framework that did not have space for what you actually do. And I think I let that framework affect the team culture in ways that were not fair to you." He paused. "You have been doing exactly what this work requires, and I think some of us made it harder for you instead of easier. That was wrong." She did not know what to say for a moment. Then she said, "I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you." She meant it. But she also noticed something interesting about how she felt. A few months earlier, this moment would have been everything. She would have needed it like water. The validation, the official correction of the record, the acknowledgement that she had been right and the misunderstanding had been unfair. She would have held it up and breathed it in and felt the tension in her chest finally release. But now, sitting in Marcus's office, she felt something quieter than relief. She felt grateful. She felt moved. But she did not feel like something essential had been restored to her, because she realized that essential thing had been restored to her months ago in a parked car beside an empty park on a Sunday morning. She had not needed this moment the way she once would have needed it. The approval had come. But she had already found something more stable than approval. Around the same time, one of the women from her church friend group reached out. Her name was Donna. She had been one of the ones who went quiet, who carried something about Clara that was not true. She called on a Tuesday evening and asked if they could get coffee. Clara said yes. They sat at a small table in a coffee shop near the church. Donna held her mug with both hands and said, "I think I owe you an explanation and probably an apology." She told Clara that she had let herself believe things without ever asking Clara directly, that she had filled in silences with assumptions and then treated those assumptions as facts, that she had been unfair. Clara listened. She did not rush to reassure her. She did not say, "Oh, it was nothing, it was fine. Do not worry about it," the way women are often taught to collapse discomfort as quickly as possible. She let it be what it was. She let Donna finish. And then she said, "I forgive you. And I want to say this carefully because I mean it. I think what happened between us this year taught me something I needed to learn. I am not glad it hurt, but I am glad I learned it." Donna looked up. "What did you learn?" Clara thought for a moment. She said, "I learned that I had been building too much of myself on being understood. I needed people to see me correctly, and when they did not, it shook me more than it should have. I think God used this year to move me off of that, to teach me that I can be known fully by Him even when I am misunderstood by everyone else. And that is actually enough. It is more than enough." Donna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That is one of the most honest things I have heard anyone say. They talked for 2 more hours. They laughed a little at the end. They did not become the same as they had been before, because you cannot always go back, and sometimes the relationship that grows after a wound is a different and deeper kind of relationship than the one that existed before the wound. But something real was rebuilt between them that afternoon. Something built on honesty instead of assumption. Clara drove home in the early evening, the kind of evening where the light is gold and low and everything looks a little more beautiful than it probably is. She thought about the year. She thought about the accumulated weight of it. The work, the church, the silences, the second-hand truths that were not truths at all, the Sunday morning in the parked car. She thought about how different the season would have felt if she had spent it only trying to correct the record, only fighting to be understood, only measuring herself by how accurately others perceived her. She thought about how exhausted she would have been, how hollowed out. Instead, she had slowly and painfully learned to come back to something more solid. Not that she was always right, not that she was always wise, but that she was known, fully, honestly, without performance or defense, known by the one who had never confused her with the story someone else was telling about her. She thought about Deshawn, about how he came and sat beside her and asked how come she always came back, about how she had answered him, without quite knowing she was also answering herself. She thought about what it means to be faithful, not for the sake of being noticed as faithful, but because faithfulness is simply who you are choosing to be. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. She thought, I am not the same person I was a year ago. And that is not a sad thing. That is actually a very good thing. The woman who started that year needed people to see her clearly in order to feel okay. The woman finishing it had found a kind of okayness that did not depend on anyone's vision of her. That is the thing about the seasons that feel like they are doing nothing but taking from you. Sometimes they are the most important work of your entire life. Not visible work. Not the kind you can put on a report or share at a gathering. The inner kind, the deep root kind, the kind that goes down so far into you that nothing surface level can pull it out anymore. Sometimes the painful season is not punishment, it is preparation. Sometimes the isolation is not abandonment, it is focus. Sometimes the silence of heaven is not absence, it is depth. God working at a level of you that noise cannot reach. And maybe this is the hardest thing to hold but also the most liberating. Maybe some of the misunderstanding was never supposed to be corrected by other people. Maybe some of it was meant to drive you past the need for correction at all, past the craving for other people to see you right, past the exhausting work of managing your own reputation, past all of it, into something harder and quieter and more durable, into the simple knowledge that God knows the intention behind the silence that got read as coldness. God knows the generosity behind the boundary that got read as selfishness. God knows the grief behind the quietness that got read as pride. God knows the faithfulness behind the actions that no one noticed. God knows. And that knowledge is not small. It is not a consolation prize for the people who did not get the human approval they deserved. It is the most stabilizing thing available to a human being, to be fully known and fully loved without needing to explain yourself, without needing to defend yourself, without needing to perform, to be seen down to the root of you and found worthy of love anyway. Clara would tell you, and she has told people, because her story did not stay quiet forever, that she went into that hard year as a woman who needed to be understood and came out of it as a woman who had learned to be known. Not understood by the crowd, known by God. She would tell you that the two things sound similar but feel completely different. Being understood by people gives you something that can always be taken away. Being known by God gives you something that cannot be undone. She would tell you that she is still Clara, still quiet, still careful with her words, still someone who walks toward the people standing alone at the edge of things. Still someone who will drive to work on a hard morning and choose to show up faithfully even when no one is grading her faithfulness. Still someone who will set up coffee cups for a community that does not always deserve the love she brings to it. But she is that woman from a different place now, a deeper place, a rooted place. She is not who she is because people understand her. She is who she is because God made her, and God knows her. And that is the ground she stands on. And nothing that people say or do not say can take that ground away from her. If you are sitting with this story right now, and you feel the ache of being misunderstood, if you know what it is like to have your silence misread, your intentions questioned, your heart misjudged by people you trusted, I want to say something to you directly. You are not invisible, not to God. What feels like being overlooked may actually be a season of being rooted. What feels like rejection may actually be redirection. What feels like God being silent may actually be God working at the depth of you where no noise can reach. The people who misunderstood you do not write your identity. The assumptions people made about you are not your truth. The story that formed about you in someone else's mind is not the full story. It is not even close. There is a story being written about you by the one who knows every intention you ever had that went unnoticed. Every act of love you gave that got misread. Every quiet moment of faithfulness that no one clapped for. Every prayer you prayed alone in a dark room when you did not have the energy for it, but you prayed anyway because you had decided that was who you were going to be. He sees all of it. He keeps all of it. None of it is wasted. And this is the thing that took Clara a year of pain to learn, and that I hope takes you a little less time. You do not need people to see you correctly in order to be okay. You need to be known by the one who cannot be wrong about you. That is the foundation. That is the ground that holds. When people misunderstand you, do not spend all your energy trying to correct them. Spend some of it going deeper into the one who never misunderstands. Let the season of not being seen by people be the season of being seen more fully by God. Let the isolation press you into prayer in a way that crowds never could. Let the pain of being misjudged teach you that your worth was never located in anyone's judgment in the first place. Sometimes being misunderstood is the kindest thing God can allow, because it removes the one thing that was keeping you from going deep. The approval of people is warm and real and wonderful when it comes, but it is not stable. It shifts. It changes. It can be present one year and gone the next. It is not a foundation. It was never meant to be a foundation. God's knowledge of you, that is stable. That does not shift. That was there before anyone knew your name and will be there long after every opinion of you has faded. Stand on that. Not because the pain is not real. It is real. What Clara went through was real. What you have been through is real. The loneliness is real. The confusion is real. The grief of watching people decide something about you that was never true, that is a specific and genuine kind of pain, and it deserves to be named. But the pain does not have the final word. God does, and His word about you is not the story that formed in someone's mind without your input. His word about you was spoken before you were born and has not changed and will not change based on any season you walk through. He knew you before anyone else did. He knows you now more completely than anyone else does, and what He knows, He loves. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. So if you are in a season right now where you feel misunderstood, unjudged, cast aside, forgotten, or simply too tired to keep trying to explain yourself, let me offer you the only reframe that actually holds. You do not need to be understood by everyone. You need to be known by God, and you already are. The approval of the crowd is loud, but it fades. The knowledge of God is quiet, but it lasts forever. And when you learn, really learn, in the root of you, that His knowing is enough, you will find that you can walk through any season without losing the ground beneath your feet. That is what Clara found in a parked car on a Sunday morning. That is what she carried into every hard day after it. That is what she still carries now, in the quiet of her ordinary faithful life, showing up for children who need someone steady, setting up coffee cups for a community she loves, even when it is imperfect, sitting beside people who are standing alone at the edges of things. She did not need the approval to come. She had already found what the approval was pointing toward. And you can find it too. You may already be closer to it than you think. The season that is breaking you may actually be the season that is rooting you. The silence that feels like God is far away may actually be God working at a depth that words cannot describe. The pain of not being understood by people may be the very thing that drives you past needing people's understanding into needing only His. And His understanding of you is not partial. It is not confused. It is not colored by assumption or hearsay or the story someone else told. It is complete. It is clear. It is full of love. Go into that. Go as deep as you need to. Let the hard season do its work. Let it root you instead of break you. Let it teach you the one thing that no comfortable season could have taught you. You were never meant to be held up by human approval. You were always meant to stand on the knowledge of God. And when you learn to stand there, really stand with your full weight, without one foot still in the world of other people's opinions, you will find that the ground is more solid than anything you have ever stood on before. That is where Clara stands now. That is where her story ends. And that is where yours can begin. Because even if no one else ever fully understands you, God already does. He always has. He always will. And that is enough to hold you steady for the rest of your life.